Hey, it's Tripp here from the 87th. This video is about countermeasures dispensing in BMS 4.33. Information is current as of update 3. Two comments I need to make before we start. Everything that I talk about in this video pertains to the single seat, the F-16C, the Block 52 Plus. Other block aircraft may have different variations of this theme. The other comment is please watch the video to completion. There is not just a bug, but a large cockroach in the system, and you need to be aware of that, so don't go jumping into the airplane and trying out these things that I talk about until you understand this bug that I think is in the system. So let's go down to the left quarter panel, and this is the CMDS, the countermeasures dispensing panel. It's in this configuration just after engine start. So to power it on, take the mode selector to standby, and the setup includes turning the chaff and flare switches on, turning the RWR and the jammer switches to the on position, and selecting the program that we want to run. So I'm going to run program 2. 01 and 02, as well as this MWS switch and the bit test function don't work in BMS, so we can leave these toggles down. And that's the setup. Now this RWR switch is not the main power switch for this RWR display up front. That comes from this push button, the system power switch in this location. The jammer is not the jammer power. It comes from this ECM toggle switch on the left side panel just below the audio panel. These switches, at least the RWR switch, have to be in the on position to operate normally when we're in semi or auto mode. When we're in these two modes, we'll get a call out from the VMS, the voice messaging system, bitching Betty, when we need to turn on the jammer and when we need to dispense countermeasures. So we take the mode selector to the, well, before we talk about that, let me talk about this jettison switch. It's functional now, and one scenario that I can see for putting the toggle in the jettison position is if we're planning on making a gear up landing and we're scraping down the runway and sparks are flying, and we don't want to set off one of these magnesium flares. If we set off one flare in the dispenser, they're all going to be set off, and we'll have one giant magnesium fire to compound our current emergency. So I think they've given us the option of jettisoning all the remaining flares, not the remaining chaff, but just the flares. So that's one function that I can easily see and understand for that switch. Alright, back to the mode selector. In the manual mode, each time I dispense chaff and flare with the CMS up, that's the countermeasure switch on your stick. If you have that programmed, it's a four-way function switch. So CMS up will run this program that you've selected. So, and then stop. So each time I CMS up, the program runs and stops. If I go to auto, or correction, semi, then if I get a threat against the aircraft sensors detect a launch threat against the aircraft, like an SA-2 launch, then I will get a voice call out from Bitchin' Betty that says counter. So that tells me that I might want to think about dispensing some chaff and flare. So to do that, I would CMS up, and this program that I have selected would run one time and stop. And then I'd have to CMS up again if I want to continue to dispense chaff and flare. Another thing that happens in the semi mode is when there's a threat against the aircraft, or there are radar interrogations against the aircraft, you might get a jammer call from Bitchin' Betty. She'll say jammer. And so you can turn your jammer on, and the way you do that is with the CMS switch aft. That will enable the ECM system, or the jammer. Now if I wanted to turn the jammer off, I would do CMS right, and that is the ECM standby position, so that would turn the jammer off. Alright, so if I get a threat against the airplane in semi mode, I have a couple of options. I can either choose to dispense the chaff and flare manually, as I just discussed, or I could put the system in the consent mode, and I do that with CMS aft. So that gives the system my consent to dispense this program whenever the sensors detect a threat against the aircraft. It'll automatically happen, and it'll only run this program one time and then stop for each time that I go CMS aft. If the threat is still against the aircraft and I CMS aft again, then the program will run one time and stop. If at some point the threat against the aircraft stops and I just happen to CMS aft, well, nothing's going to happen until the next time I get a threat. And because I just CMS aft, then the chaff and flare will dispense one time. So that's the function of the semi mode. Auto mode's a little different. If there are radar interrogations against the aircraft, in other words, somebody's radar is looking at the aircraft, Bitch and Betty will not even give me a jammer call out. She will just automatically turn on, well, the system will automatically turn on my jammer, and I'll have a little green jammer light up there on the front panel indicating that the jammer's on. And as a matter of fact, if I CMS right, I won't be able to turn that jammer off. The only way that I can turn that jammer off is to come down to the ECM switch and put it in the off position. So that's how the auto function works with respect to the jammer. With respect to the countermeasures, in auto, if I've given the aircraft system consent to release chaff and flare by CMS aft, and there is a threat against the aircraft, then chaff and flare will dispense automatically. And not only will they dispense once, but they'll continue to dispense. And they will continue to dispense until the threat subsides. When there is no longer a threat against the aircraft, then chaff and flare will stop being thrown off the airplane. Now, if I subsequently encounter another threat against the aircraft, like another missile warning, then the chaff and flare program will pick up again and dispense chaff and flare. And as long as that threat's running, the chaff and flare will dispense all the way until the point that they get to the bingo values that I've specified. And I'll show you how to do that. In this TE, I've set 20, I think, for the chaff bingo and 15 for the flare. So when I'm in auto and chaff and flare are being dispensed, when I hear Bitch and Betty say low, it's probably because I reached my bingo limit for flares first. And the program will stop dispensing flares. It'll continue to dispense chaff until they get low, and then it'll stop dispensing chaff, and I'll get another low call out. Now, if I still have the threat and I would still want to dispense countermeasures, I just hit CMS aft again to give it consent to continue dispensing chaff and flare. And now, since I'm below my my low values or my bingo values, it'll bump these things off until they're down to 0 or until the threat stops. Now, another way I can stop chaff and flare coming off the airplane at any time when I'm in the auto mode is I can CMS right. And CMS right does two things. It controls my jammer, so it's going to disable my jammer, my ECM, and it's going to take the system from auto and put it in the semi position. Now, it doesn't physically move the switch, it just does it internally, but because I went from auto to semi, it'll stop dispensing chaff and flare. Now, I can also take the switch manually and put it in semi. That would do the same thing. Or I could take the switch and selector and put it in bypass, and that would stop chaff and flare from being dispensed. But the easiest thing to do would be to just CMS right to halt the dispense of chaff and flare. Alright, so that's what semi and auto do with respect to the jammer and the auto. Just to be clear, if I'm in auto and I've given consent and I'm tooling along and I get a threat against the aircraft, the jammer comes on automatically, yeah, and I can't turn it off with a CMS write. Yeah, we did discuss that. Okay, the bypass mode, if I do get that low call out from Bitch and Betty, then I might want to be a little bit more conservative about how I dispense these chaff and flare. I don't want them to continually run, or may not want to run the whole program that I have chosen here. So if I go to bypass and I dispense chaff and flare with CMS up, then it's only going to kick off one chaff bundle and one flare each time I CMS up. So that's a handy function. So I run the program in manual simply because I don't have the real estate on my stick to put another four-way hat functions, and so I just kind of have to do it manually. Alright, so that is what I wanted to talk about down here. Let's go up to the DED. Now if I hit the list button here, I see that ICP button number 7 controls this electronic warfare stuff, so let's hit that. And I come to this EWS control page. Now here I can set up my bingo values. These are the numbers, the values that I want the system to alert me when I reach. Now you can do these functions in the weapon delivery planner long before you get into the airplane, or you could do it when you're in the sim, when you're on the mission planning screen talking about your role and weapon loadout and all that. You can go to the DTS tab and then hit EWS, and you can set up all the functions that I'm going to describe here. Be sure to save them so that they're available when you get in the cockpit. But on this page, if I wanted to change these values, I just put the asterisks around the value I want to change and hit the numbers on the ICP. To move the asterisk, it's with the DCS switch up or down. One feature that I want is I want to hear bingo. I want to know when my chaff or flare get down to that low quantity. So I want Bitch and Betty to sing out low so that I know that maybe I want to go down to the CMDS panel and switch the mode to bypass. So I want that alert. Another alert that I want to hear from Bitch and Betty is this required counter call out. Because I have the jammer and the RWR switches on, and this in the on function, then if I have not given consent to the system, if I'm just tooling along and I get a launch warning, I want to hear Bitch and Betty either say jammer for me to turn my jammer on, or I want to hear her say counter. So I know that I have a need to dispense countermeasures because there's a threat of some sort against the aircraft. So I want to be able to hear that. What I don't want to hear is this feedback, so I leave that off. And what feedback does is each time chaff and flare come off the airplane in manual or semi, you get a chaff flare from Bitch and Betty, and I don't need to hear that. In the heat of battle, I'm trying to listen to other communications. I know when I dispense chaff and flare. I don't need her to tell me if I'm in semi or manual, or if I'm in auto. I can see when they're coming off the airplane, so I leave this in the off position. Now if you hit the sequence position here on the DCS switch, it'll take you to the chaff page. If you hit sequence again, you'll go to the flare page, and this is where you can, in flight, you can change these values. The only way to change these values on the chaff and flare page is to go to the mode standby. It's the only way these numbers are going to change. And again, just use the DCS up, down, and the ICP numbers to change these values. Alright, so if we want to look at program 2, which is what I have selected, I just use the increment decrement switch here, bump it up to program 2, and I can look and see what is programmed for chaff and flare. And what this is telling me is I've selected 2 chaff bundles to come off, so that's my burst quantity, and I want them to come off 1 second apart, so that's my burst interval. So one comes off, a second later the other one comes off, and so that is the routine that I'm going to run here. And I want to run that routine 2 times, so that's the sequence quantity, or the salvo quantity they call it. So I want this routine to run twice, and each time it runs, I want there to be 1 second interval between each time it runs. So the salvo interval is 1 second. That's what I've chosen here and on the flare page. I just have them set up the same way. Alright, so again I have to be in standby to change these numbers. The big caveat, and this is the big roach, is if you're in, pretty sure it's semi, but I know it's auto, if you set for a salvo quantity 0 or a 1, then the system is not going to operate properly. As a matter of fact, it's not going to operate. If you give a consent to release chaff and flare, nothing's going to happen. If you get a threat warning against the aircraft, Bitch and Betty is going to say counter, 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 counter over and over again. And so the system is not operating properly. So don't put a 0 or a 1 here, either on the flare page or the chaff page. Now I think you can get away with a 1 here on the manual if you're running in manual mode. It makes no sense at all any time to put a 0 here that I can see. So just to be safe in any programming you do, don't put a 0 or a 1 here, and you'll be alright. Now not only can I program 1 through 4, which is what I'm able to select on the CMDS panel down below, but also can bump this up to program 5 or program 6. Now, program 5 is the slap switch function. It's that little kind of a panic button type thing by the throttle. You just hit it with the left side of your fist or your back of your hand, and it's supposed to dispense chaff and flare the way you have it set up, but it's not really functional in BMS. What is functional is program 6, and that's activated with CMS left, and that'll dispense chaff and flare the way you have them. Now realistically, or one scenario is use for it is to just program the flare for dispersion, not the chaff. And the idea is if you're in close air-to-air combat like a dogfight, or if you're down in the mud rooting around and you know you have man-pad threats against you, you want to pop off flares. So the easiest thing to do for flares only would be to just hit CMS left, and that would run this CMS program number 6 each time you hit CMS left. Okay, I think that is what I wanted to say about that. Let me just think here, see if there's anything I haven't covered. Yeah, so just to reiterate, in semi mode, if you give the aircraft system consent by CMS aft, when you get a threat against the aircraft, it'll run the selector program 1 time and stop until you either give it consent again. If there's consent and there's a threat, it will run the program. If you've given it consent again and there is no threat, then nothing's going to happen. You can always CMS forward and pop off chaff and flare anytime you want. In auto, it's a little bit different. The program runs continuously until you tell it to stop with a CMS right, and then you can start it again with CMS aft to start the chaff and flare dispense. Alright, I think that is it. I hope that's everything I wanted to talk about. I hope this helps somebody, and Trip out.